Let's get the hardware setup out of the way first. I'm going to record two guitars onto two separate tracks. Naturally, I have to have some way to get the sounds from the guitars to the computer and into the Acid Pro timeline. I'll have my guitar players plug their guitars into a couple of guitar amplifier emulation units, dial in the sounds they want, and then send the signal from the amp emulators into my multiple input sound card. I'll use input 7 for guitar 1 and 8 for guitar 2. The sound card provides the hardware interface that routes the two guitar signals along separate channels into the computer. In my case, I connect my sound card to my computer with an IEEE 1394 cable. You'll also hear these cables referred to as FireWire or iLink. Not all sound cards connect to the computer in this way. You may need to connect yours via a USB cable, or perhaps your card fits into one of your PCI slots and then features a breakout box that you plug into that card. If you're recording onto a laptop, you may have yet another method for connecting your sound card to your PC. However you need to connect your sound card, I'll assume that you've already done so. Back in Acid Pro, first open the project Multitrack Audio from the Class Number 3 folder on the companion disk. Play the project. You'll recognize it as the project you were working with back in the MIDI Basics class. We'll add two guitar parts to this project. Let's do a little organization of the project first. Choose Insert Folder Track. If necessary, reposition the new folder track to the third track position. Double-click the scribble strip for the folder track and name it MIDI Tracks. Now drag the 3 MIDI tracks in your project into the folder track. Finally, collapse the folder track. Now you have more room to work with the audio portion of your project. Choose Insert Audio Track to add a new track to your project. Immediately add another track, so now you have 2 new audio tracks. Make the track headers for the 2 new tracks taller so that you can more effectively see the buttons and controls they contain. Name the first new track Guitar 1 and the second Guitar 2. If you've used previous versions of Acid Pro, you've probably already noticed several new buttons on the audio track headers. We're particularly interested in the new Arm for Record button. This button sets the track into record ready mode, where it listens for audio signal from a specific sound card input. Click the Arm for Record button on both track headers now. A record meter appears on each track. With your Acid Pro preferences set to their defaults, these tracks are set to listen to the sound card that you selected for your Windows sound playback device. But you need to prepare Acid Pro to detect the external sound card into which you've plugged the guitars. First, choose Options, Preferences, and click the Audio Device tab. If you've already viewed the MIDI Basics class, then you've been here already to set up your ASIO drivers. Recall that these drivers cut down on latency when you record with an external MIDI controller. You can see that currently my audio device type uses the default Microsoft Sound Mapper. I want to use my high-quality sound card and its ASIO drivers for this recording session, and if your sound card provides ASIO drivers, you'll want to use them too. We'll talk about why in the next lesson. Click the Audio Device Type drop-down arrow and choose your ASIO drivers from the list. Click OK to dismiss the Preferences dialog. Your tracks were automatically disarmed when you went to the Preferences dialog, so click the Arm for Record button on each guitar track again to rearm them. Now you can specify the exact inputs that you want the tracks to listen to. I plugged Guitar 1 into input 7 on my sound card, and I want to record that guitar onto track 7. Click the Record Device Selector button for track 7. You see 3 options in the drop-down menu. We'll talk about Input Monitor in the next lesson. Vegas sees the inputs on most sound cards as stereo pairs, and you can record in either stereo or mono. Choose stereo from the list. In the cascading list, you can see that input 4 listens to input 7 on my sound card for the left channel signal, and input 8 for the right. If I choose this option, I'll be recording both guitars to different channels of the same track. I don't want to do that in this case, but sometimes you will want to. For instance, maybe you're recording a keyboardist whose keyboard outputs a stereo signal that you're sending to both of the inputs in a stereo pair. But since I don't want the guitars on the same track, I'll choose the mono option. In the cascading menu, you can see that input 4 appears twice. The first appearance of input 4 points to input 7 on my sound card. Remember that I plugged guitar 1 into input 7, and since I want that on this track, I'll choose that option from the cascading menu. Click the Record Device Selector button for track 8 and point this track to the mono signal coming from input 8 on the sound card. Now my 2 tracks, have been set to listen to separate sound card inputs. Now you're ready to set record levels. My sound card features trim knobs so that I can control the input level right from the front of the unit. You may not have this type of control with your sound card. If not, yours may utilize proprietary mixer software. This software often takes the form of a virtual mixer and enables you to control input-output levels through the software. If all else fails, you'll have to run your guitars into a mixer and then run the signal from the mixer into your sound card. You'll then use the software or hardware mixer's controls to adjust the input volume of the guitar signals. Have your guitarists play and adjust the input levels for your tracks until you start to see the meters registering the incoming audio. Notice that although we can see the levels coming into my track, we can't hear the guitars. In the next lesson, you'll use input monitoring to solve that problem. For now, adjust the input level until the record meter for each track peaks somewhere between -6 dB and -3 dB. Make sure that the meters don't peak above the 0 dB point. If they do, Acid Pro displays the peak values in a red box. Anytime you see the red box above or next to a play meter or record meter, you know that the signal is too hot or too loud, a situation known as digital clipping. Digital clipping causes unwanted distortion, which degrades the quality of your audio. As you make adjustments, click the peak indicator for the record meter to reset it. Keep working on your input settings until you establish a good recording level. Open Catch-up number 1 from the Class number 3 folder on the companion disk. This makes sure you've got your project set up the way I do. Keep in mind, though, that if you've assigned your input devices differently than mine, you may need to reassign them after you open the catch-up file so that they point to your input device properly. As you saw at the end of the previous lesson, when the guitarists play, you can see the record meters react to the incoming audio signals, but you can't hear the guitars through the Acid mixer. Remember, they're playing through guitar amp emulators, not real amplifiers. Since the emulators have no speakers of their own, you can't hear their output without connecting them to an amplifier. I'll let the amplifier that handles my computer audio also play the signal from the amp emulators. This means the signal passes from the emulators to the sound card and from there to the computer. Although some sound cards provide a monitoring device that enables you to hear the audio that's being sent to the card, many others do not. Acid Pro provides a solution called input monitoring. You can use this input monitoring instead of your sound card's monitoring solution, or in the event that your sound card has no monitoring feature. We'll set our tracks up to use input monitoring. Rearm tracks 7 and 8 if you've not done so already. Click the Record Device Selector button on track 7 and choose Input Monitor from the menu. From the cascading menu, choose On. Now have the player make noise again. Now you can hear the signal that's being sent to the sound card and then onto this track in Acid Pro. Here's where those audio drivers become so important. The Input Monitor feature only works with audio drivers. If your sound card does not provide audio drivers, or if you neglected to choose them on the Audio Device tab of the Preferences dialog, you cannot use the input monitoring feature. In that case, you'll have to rely on your sound card's software to do the monitoring, or perhaps monitor the signal off of your mixer. You can see that if you don't use input monitoring, your setup gets more complicated. Not only that, but in the next few moments, you'll see that without the input monitoring feature, you'll miss out on some powerful signal processing abilities that can really enhance your recording session. Activate input monitoring for the Guitar 2 track as well. Input monitoring provides much more than just a monitor of the incoming signal. It monitors the incoming signal after it's been routed through the track's entire signal path. What does that mean? Let's take a look. Notice that the volume for track 7 sits at -6 dB, the default for all audio tracks in Acid Pro. Have Guitar Player 1 begin playing. Drop the volume of track 7 down to -infinity. This cuts the signal out of the Acid Pro master bus, just as if the signal were coming from an event on the timeline. Notice, however, that changing the volume of the track does not affect the input volume of the guitar from the sound card, as you can see when you watch the record meter. Double-click the volume slider and it moves to 0 dB. With Player 1 still playing, pan track 7 full left. Again, you hear the results just as if the audio were playing from the timeline. Set the panning to 50% left for track 7 and 20% right for track 8. So what does all this buy you? Well, since the two players will be recording simultaneously, you may need to mix the output of their tracks a bit so that they can both hear themselves and the bed track along to which they're playing. Input monitoring makes that possible. But it gets better. Suppose one of the guitar players would like an effect on his guitar that he doesn't have on his amp emulator. For the sake of simple demonstration, let's say that Player 1 wants a bit of chorus. Since with input monitoring, you're listening to the entire signal path of the track into which you're recording, you can add the chorus. Let's do so now. Click the Track Effects button for track 7. In the Audio Plugin window, click the Edit Chain button. This opens the plugin chooser. In the tree view, select the Track Optimized folder, and from the list view, select Chorus. Click the Add button to add it to the plugin chain. You could add up to 32 effects to this chain. For now, click OK. Back in the Audio Plugin window, choose the Chorus 3 preset and have the guitarist play. Now the track has the chorus the player wanted. Close the Audio Plugin window. We're getting closer to recording, but it isn't at all unusual in a multi-track session for the different players to want to hear different mixes of the tune while they play their parts. For instance, a player may typically want to hear more of his own instrument. If everyone wants to hear more of their own instrument, you, as the recording engineer, need to figure out how to make everyone happy so that they can give their best performance. The Acid Pro Mixer gives you the tools you need. Let's say that our two guitar players want to hear different mixes. And further, let's say we've decided that it'd be nice to have our vocalist sing her part while the guitarists record their parts in order to achieve a bit more live feel to the song. In all likelihood, our vocalist wants a different mix than either of the guitar players. We've got some setting up to do. First, open the file Catch-Up Number 2 from the Class Number 3 folder on the companion disc. Insert a new audio track and name it Vocals. Expand the track header height a bit so that you can see all of the controls more easily. Connect the vocalist's microphone to your sound card. My sound card has XLR inputs, so I can go directly from the mic to the sound card. You may need to pass through a hardware mixer in order to get the signal from the mic to your sound card. I've plugged the mic into input 6 on my sound card. In Acid Pro, arm the vocals track for recording and assign the appropriate sound card input to the track. You may have to rearm the guitar tracks too and fix their routing if I've routed mine differently than your setup. Have your vocalist make noise into the microphone to make sure that you're receiving a signal from the microphone. Activate input monitoring and add reverb to the track effects chain.
Ain't got no place to go, think I hadn't for home. When I see this standing from the other shore, can we
Use the
take
long
it
haul
more?
preset for the reverb. Now, set your proper record input levels. Now you've got 3 tracks armed and ready to complete a multi-track recording. Let's create the separate headphone mixes for our musicians. To provide separate mixes for everyone, you'll need a sound card that, in addition to the multiple inputs that you're already using, also has multiple outputs. My card has 8 analog outs. I'm already using 2 of those outs, outputs 1 and 2, for the main stereo mix that I hear over my computer system when I play the project. We'll consider that to be the control room mix to which the recording engineer, that's us, will listen while the recording takes place. Now, guitar player 1 asks to have more drums and bass, less keyboard, and a bit less guitar 2 in his mix. We could change the main mix and feed him that, but that would not only change what we hear in the control room, but also probably won't be what guitarist 2 and our vocalist want in their headphones. So we'll set up a special mix just for him. In the mixer window, click the Insert Bus button. This adds a new bus to the mixer. Drag the left edge of the mixer window to the left to make it larger so that you have more room to work. Label the new bus Guitar 1 Phones. By default, the new bus routes its audio to the master bus. The master bus then routes the audio out to your selected playback device so that you can monitor the audio. Click the Output Device Selector button on the master bus to set your current output device settings for the master bus. You can see that my master bus routes to outputs 1 and 2 on my sound card. Just as you could change the device here for the master, you can change the output device for any of your buses. Without changing your master output device settings, click the Output Device Selector button for the Guitar 1 Phones bus. You see that it currently routes to the master bus, but that just like the master bus, you can change the routing for this bus. I'll send the output of this bus to outputs 3 and 4 on my sound card. I have a headphone feed connected to those 2 outputs, and that feed runs to Guitar Player 1's headphones. Play the project. As it plays, click the Mute button for the master bus. Of course, you no longer hear the project. Now, put Guitar Player 1's headphones on. You still don't hear anything because you haven't yet routed any of the tracks to the Guitar 1 Phones bus. Stop playback. Now let's create the custom mix Player 1 wants. First, click the track icon for any of your tracks. This gives the track header area focus. Type Ctrl-Shift-Up arrow. This keyboard shortcut increases the height of each track header, with the exception of the collapsed folder track. Keep increasing the height of the track headers until they are all tall enough to reveal the new Bus A fader, which eventually appears beneath the pan slider on each track. You'll use these faders to create the custom mix for Guitar Player 1's headphones. You can use a couple different approaches to building the mix. Let's start with the same mix as the main mix and adjust from there. Starting with track 1, set the Bus A fader to match the volume fader. So, on track 1, set the Bus A fader to -6 dB. Set track 2's Bus A fader to -6 dB also. Skip the folder track and set the Bus A fader on the remaining audio tracks to match their volume settings. Now you've got exactly the same mix of your project's audio tracks in the Guitar 1 phone's bus as you do in the master bus. However, the MIDI tracks present a little bit of a different situation. You don't hear the MIDI tracks in the headphone mix at all. Remember that MIDI is not audio, so you can't just route your MIDI tracks to the new audio bus because the bus can't understand MIDI information. That information has to run through the soft synth bus to be turned into audio. So how do you get the audio that the MIDI tracks generate to your headphone mix? First, we'll render the MIDI tracks down to a mixed audio file and then route that audio file to the headphone mix just like any other audio file. You have 3 MIDI tracks in your project, each of which you've tucked away in your MIDI tracks folder track. We'll use the Render to New Track feature to create one mixed audio track from these 3 MIDI tracks. First, unmute the master bus. Click the Solo button on the MIDI tracks folder track. This isolates the MIDI tracks and takes every other track out of the mix. Choose Tools, Render to New Track. In the Render to New Track dialog, choose a save location, or just use the default that you set earlier. Name the file Mixed MIDI, choose Wave from the Save As Type dialog, and click Save. The project renders, and when the process finishes, a new track appears at the bottom of your track list. Click the Solo button on the folder track to unsolo the MIDI tracks. It might help you organizationally to have the track next to your MIDI tracks in the track list. Drag the track icon for the mixed MIDI track up and drop it right after the MIDI tracks folder track. You could even put it inside the folder track, but it will help you to have it out at this level so that you don't have to expand your folder track in order to work with this track's controls. Draw an event on the new track from the beginning to the end of the project. This event holds your rendered MIDI mix. Make sure it starts right at the beginning of your project timeline or it won't play in sync with the rest of the project. Now that you have an audio track that contains your MIDI mix, you can send it to the alternate headphone bus just like you've already sent other audio tracks. Make the track header for the new track a bit taller so that you can see all of its controls. You don't need to send any of this track to the master bus because the original MIDI tracks already route to the main mix via the soft synth bus. So drop the volume fader for the mixed MIDI track to -infinity. You should still be listening to the Guitar 1 phone's mix. Play the project and set the mixed MIDI track Bus A fader to 0.0 dB. Now you hear the MIDI-generated audio in your headphone mix. Now you can customize the mix for Guitar Player 1. Recall that he wanted to hear more drums and less of both the keyboards and Guitar 2 in his mix. Instead of raising the volume of any track, it's often better to lower the volume of tracks to start off. Stop playback. Click the Arm for Record button on each track again to rearm them. Play the project and have your musicians play along. Use the Bus A fader on the mixed MIDI track to lower the volume of the keyboards. Keep going until your musician gives you the sign that he's happy with the level. My man likes it at about -14 dB. Now that he's happy with that, drop the Bus A fader for the Guitar 2 track until he's happy with that too. My musician stops me at about -8 dB. Now that I've lowered those 2 tracks for him, the drums that he wanted louder stand out better without any adjustment, and he's happy with their level, so we're almost set. Before we move on to setting up a mix for Player 2, play the project from the beginning, and again have your musicians play and sing along. Keep an eye on the meters for the Guitar 1 phone's bus. If you see that they clip, drop the fader a few decibels to fix the problem. If your musician wants more volume in the headphones, you're far better off running from your sound card into a headphone amplifier and adjusting the volume from there than you are cranking the Guitar 1 phone's bus up to the point at which clipping occurs. Now let's get Guitar Player 2 all set up. To send Player 2 a separate headphone mix, you'll need another bus. Click the Insert Bus button in the mixer. Change the name of the new bus to Guitar 2 Phones. Plug player 2's headphones into sound card outputs 5 and 6, and route the Guitar 2 phones bus to those outputs. In the track headers, you don't see a fader for bus B like you do for bus A. Since you can add up to 26 additional buses to the mixer, the list of faders would get out of hand quickly. So instead of adding a new line for each additional bus, the bus A label on the track header becomes a button called the Multi-Purpose Slider Mode button. Click the Multi-Purpose Slider Mode button for any of the tracks in your project. From the menu that appears, choose Bus B. The multi-purpose slider now controls the send to Bus B. In fact, look at all of the other tracks in your project. The multi-purpose slider has been changed for each of those as well. Set all of the Bus B faders to match the volume faders on each track. Then go about the same process you used for Guitar 1 to create the mix that Guitar Player 2 wants in his headphones. You're almost there. Now insert another bus, label it Vocal Phones, route the new bus to sound card outputs 7 and 8, plug your singer's headphones into the outputs 7 and 8, and adjust the mix to the Vocal Phones bus to the singer's preferences. So there you have it. You've pretty quickly set up 4 different mixes of your project. Now, since I have no way of knowing your actual sound card setup, I'm going to have you delete the 3 headphone mix buses so that they don't appear in any of the catch-up files from here on out. That way we'll avoid any confusion caused by the fact that the routing that I set up in the catch-up files doesn't match your system. Click bus A to select it, and then press the delete key to remove it. In the same way, remove the other 2 alternate buses. Now, let's get to recording. Open the Catch-Up Number 3 project from the Class Number 3 folder on the companion disk. With your various mixes tweaked out just the way everyone wants them, have your musicians get ready to record. Scroll down and arm your guitar and vocal tracks for recording. Use the Record Device selector to turn input monitoring back on. Click the Go to Start button to move the cursor to the beginning of the project. Make sure everybody's ready, and click the Record button. As the project plays, the musicians play along, and the project records them onto the designated tracks. You can see the waveform for each track draw in as you record. When the project reaches the end, click the Stop button to end recording. The Recorded Files dialog opens and lists the 3 new files that you just recorded. Acid has assigned the new files names based in part on the name of the project and the name of the track from which the recording came. If you had been working in a real project, these file names would have started with the name of the project instead of the Catch-Up Number 3 that we have here. So that we know what songs these files belong to, let's rename the files. Acid Pro has selected the first file in the list automatically. Click the Rename button. This highlights the name of the selected file. Type Can We Take Any More -rhythm guitar. And press the Enter key to finalize the name change. Select the next file and rename it Can We Take Any More -lead guitar. And name the last of the 3 files, Can We Take Any More -vocal. When you're done renaming the files, click the Done button to dismiss the Recorded Files dialog. You now have 3 new events on the ARM tracks that hold the audio you just recorded. Play the project from the beginning and listen to the results. Open Catch-up number 4 from the class number 3 folder on the companion disk so that you can work with the recordings that I've just made. Play the project again to remind yourself what it sounds like.
Can we take any more? Can we take any more?
Now that we've got the guitars and vocal tracks down, let's focus on the drum track for a while. We've used a nice loop for the track, but it lacks variety. Even though we added the woodblock and cymbal crashes with a MIDI track in our soft synth, it'd be nice to add a few drum fills to this drum part. This gives us the perfect opportunity to discuss the new clip capabilities of Acid Pro 6. You can now add as many clips to a single track as you want and then draw in events on that track that use any of those clips. Essentially, this means for the first time in Acid Pro, you can put multiple media files on one track to build a composite of, let's say, drums. You can add clips to a track in several different ways. As you'll see later, you can record multiple times to the same track and create a new clip each time. Or you can simply drag a file from the Explorer window onto the track header or into the timeline and add the file as a clip that way. Solo track 1, the drum track. You can see that the drums consist of a single drum loop that repeats for the length of the song. In the MIDI Basics class, you used a bus envelope to mute the MIDI tracks during the middle portion of the song. Those tracks come back in at measure 18. Let's insert a drum fill that leads up to measure 18. Click the drum event at the beginning of measure 18 to select the event and place the cursor at that point. Zoom in until the beat ruler shows the first beat of each measure. Press S on your keyboard to split the drum event. The drum fill file that you'll use lasts for 4 beats, 1 full measure, so trim the edge of the first event on the track back 1 full measure to the beginning of measure 17. Now you have a hole in your drum track. In the Explorer window, navigate to the class number 3 folder on the companion disk. Drag the file session04-fill08 and drop it into the hole on your drum track. You now have 2 different files on this track. Place your cursor at measure 16 and play through the drum fill. Stop playback. Now that you've associated the drum fill clip with this track, you can paint it anywhere you want to. Let's use it as the intro to the song too. Trim the beginning of the first event on the drum track to the right so that it starts at measure 2 instead of at the beginning of the song. In the track header, click the new Paint Clip Selector button. In the pop-up menu, you see 2 clips listed. First, you see the Rock 03 Beat-1 clip, the original drum loop. You also see another entry for the Session 04-Fill08 drum fill loop that you just added. The small bullet point before this clip identifies it as the clip currently assigned to the Acid Pro Paint and Draw tools. This means that you can now use the Draw tool to draw in a fill event over the first measure of the song. Do so now. Just so you get the feel for multiple clips on a track, let's add another, smaller drum fill just before the MIDI tracks cut out at measure 10. Click the drum event at measure 10 to select it and place your cursor there. Split the event. Trim the first event back to beat 3 of measure 9. From the class number 3 folder on the companion disk, drag the file session04-fill09 and drop it into the hole on your drum track. You can see by the waveform of the new event that even though the clip lasts for half a measure, the drum fill occupies just the last half of the event, or 1 beat. Trim the beginning of the new event to the right to trim out the silence. Then, trim the right edge of the preceding event to the same place to fill the hole. Make a 1-beat hole in the drum track leading into measure 22. Copy the Session 04-Fill09 event and paste it into the hole. Now you have 3 different clips on the track. Unsolo the drum track, zoom all the way out if you're not already, and play the project from the beginning to hear how your new drum part sounds. Click the Paint Clip Selector button and notice that now you have 3 clips in the list. You can now choose whichever clip you want to paint from this list and then use the traditional Acid Pro Draw and Paint tools to build your drum track just as you want it. As you assemble the various clips on one track, you can soon lose track of which event holds which clip. This is one reason why we've revealed the event information by default on every event. But small events don't always show the entire name of the clip in the event information. To help solve this problem, you can now change the color of the individual events in the timeline. For instance, at the moment, all of the clips in track 1 share the same color. Right-click the first drum fill event and choose Event Clip Color from the pop-up menu. From the cascading menu, choose the red color square. Any event in the track that uses this clip now changes to use the red color scheme, and you can easily distinguish from the events that use the other clips. Change the short drum fill event's color to gold. Now you can easily see exactly where you've used different clips to build your track. As a final organizational step, you might want to change the label of the track in the scribble strip. It still contains the name of the first clip you assigned to the track. Now that you have several clips on the track, a more inclusive name might be helpful. Double-click the scribble strip and rename the track to Drums. As you accumulate clips on a track, you need a way to manage all of your clips. The clip pool provides the tools you need. Each track has its own clip pool. To view the clip pool for your drum track, click the Paint Clip Selector button and choose Clip Pool from the menu. You can leave the clip pool window open while you work either in or outside of the window, and you can dock it to other windows if you want to. For now, just leave it undocked. You see the 3 clips you added to this track listed here in the clip pool. You can use the buttons across the top of the clip pool to manage and preview your clips. We'll skip the first button for a moment. Click the Open button. Use the Open dialog to navigate to the Class Number 3 folder on the companion disk and select the files Session 04-Fill06 and Session 04-Fill07 and click Open. Those 2 clips now appear in your clip pool. Click the Paint Clip Selector button and notice that both of the new clips also appear in the selection list. Back in the clip pool, both of the newly added clips have a used value of 0, meaning they've been used 0 times on the track. You can see how many events on the track use the other clips listed here as well. For instance, the track uses the Rock 03 Beat -1 clip 4 times. You can use the Save button to save a copy of a clip. When you do this, the clip also contains all of the data from the Clip Properties window for the clip. So, for instance, if you had changed the root node of the clip in the Clip Properties window, that change would be saved to the new clip. The next few buttons perform the same functions as they do in other areas of the application. Select the Session 04-Fill07 clip from the list and click the Delete button to remove it from the list. Keep in mind that you've deleted the clip from the clip pool, but you have not deleted the file from your computer drive. Click the Undo button in the main toolbar to undo the deletion. With the file still selected, click the Cut button. Again, this removes the clip from the clip pool, but as with any cut operation, the clip has been placed on the Windows clipboard, and you can now paste the clip into another track's clip pool. For now, just click the Paste button to paste the clip back into the clip pool for this track. Of course, the Copy button works the same as the Cut button, except that it doesn't remove the clip from the clip pool. So, you can see that you can manage the track's clips from here in the clip pool. You can also preview the clips. With the Session 04-Fill07 clip still selected, click the Play button to preview it. Click the Stop button to stop the preview. Preview the Session 04-Fill06 clip too. You can do more clip management within the body of the clip pool. As you've seen, you can delete a clip from the clip pool. When you do so, of course, you completely disassociate that clip from the track. Sometimes, however, you'll want to keep a clip associated with a track, yet prevent it from showing up in the Paint Clip Selector list. For instance, say you want to keep the Fill07 clip associated with the track, but you know that you won't be using it for some time. Deselect the checkbox for that clip. Now, click the Paint Clip Selector button and notice that the Fill07 clip no longer appears in the list. So now you can't use it to paint into the track, but you haven't disassociated it from the track completely. Select the checkbox again to add it back to the Paint Clip Selector list. Next, the pencil icon identifies the clip currently assigned to the Paint and Draw tools. Click the Paint Clip Selector button and notice that the selection indicator here identifies the same clip as the pencil icon in the clip pool. Click the checkbox for the active clip. You see that you can't deselect this checkbox because you can't make the currently active clip unavailable. To make a different clip, the active clip, click the blank space between the checkbox and the name of the clip that you want to make active. Finally, let's return to the Removed Unused Clips button. You see that you still have 2 clips in your clip pool that have not been used in your project. When you previewed those clips a few moments ago, you probably noticed that they don't fit the style of this song very well, and you'll probably never use them. In that case, you can easily sweep them out of the list. Click the Removed Unused Clips button to remove every file with a used value of 0 from the clip pool. You can reach many clip management tools through the Windows context menu. For instance, right-click Rock 03 Beat-1 clip in the list and choose Rename from the menu. Name the clip Main Beat. Notice that the event information for any event that uses this clip changes to reflect the clip's new name. Right-click any of the clips and take a look at all of the other available options. Most of the options should make sense to you based on what you've learned already. Note, though, that from here you can open this clip in Sony SoundForge and edit the file in that application. Or, if the clip was created in one of the Sony software applications and was rendered with file path information, you can launch the original project that created the clip and make changes to it. Finally, you can add the clip to the groove pool, where you could assign its groove to any other track in your project. So you can see that the clip pool provides a great deal of power for working with your clips and the media files they represent. As I mentioned, each track has its own clip pool. To see the clip pool for another track, click the track. Click through the various tracks in your project to open their clip pools, and notice that you don't need to close one track's clip pool before you can open another's. When you're done looking around, click the Close button to close the Track Properties window, which holds the clip pool. Now that you have a good understanding of clips, open Catch-up number 5 from the Class number 3 folder. Let's say we think we've got our recording wrapped up. Everyone has torn down their gear and gone home, and we've spent some time working on the drum track. The next morning, you listen to the vocal and guitar tracks that you recorded and decide that you're not happy with the performance of guitar player number 1. Solo the guitar 1 track and play the project. The track starts out well enough, but by the end of the track, the playing starts getting sloppy. Stop playback. You're not happy with this performance, but you don't want to hassle with finding another player any more than you want to call this guy back. But what choice do you really have? With all of this wonderful new multi-track recording capability, it's easy to overlook what have been the real strengths of Acid Pro for so many years. And yet, those very strengths, along with the powerful new clip tools, can save this session at absolutely no additional cost. No rehiring the musicians, no time spent resetting their gear, and no time spent re-recording parts. Listen to the track again. As you listen, you soon realize that this part consists of a repeating pattern. As you've seen with your work with loops, like the drum and bass in this project, repeating patterns lend themselves perfectly to the loop concept. I like the way he played the first iteration of the pattern, so let's make a loop out of that and use it throughout the song. Stop playback if you haven't already. The repeating pattern starts when the band joins the drums at measure 2 and ends at the beginning of measure 6. Set your loop region so that it encompasses measures 2 through 5. Click the loop playback button and play the project. You should still have the guitar 1 track soloed. Let the project play through this section and loop back. You can hear that if you made a loop of this section, it would work nicely for the entire tune. Stop playback. Click the track icon for the guitar 1 track to ensure that it has focus. Now, right-click the event in this track and choose Select in Chopper from the pop-up menu. This opens the chopper window, which you'll probably find in the window docking area unless you've previously repositioned it. In the chopper window, make a selection over the same 4 measures of the file, measures 2 through 5. It might help to zoom into the chopper a bit so that you can see the region markers more effectively. Remember, you can zoom either with your mouse wheel or your up and down arrow keys. Play the selected portion of the chopper to make sure that you have the entire progression. Remember, the file sounds different in the chopper than it does when you play it in the track because you added a chorus effect to the track back when you recorded it. In the chopper, you hear the dry signal. As you'll see later, this points out that even though you applied the chorus to the track during the recording session, Acid Pro actually recorded the dry guitar signal. This means that during mixdown, you can easily change or even eliminate that chorus if you want to. When you're sure you have the correct selection in the chopper, right-click inside the selected area and choose Chop to New Clip from the menu. In the Chop to New dialog, choose a location to which to save the file. If you followed my advice earlier, the save location already defaults to the folder you chose when you changed the folder preferences at the beginning of the process. Give the file a descriptive name. I'll call it Rhythm Guitar Loop. To save space on my hard drive, I'll change the Save As Type setting to Sony Perfect Clarity Audio. The PCA format gives you files that sound just as good as uncompressed WAV files, but take up much less space. You don't need to save this file in stereo, so choose 44,100 Hz 16-bit mono from the template drop-down. Finally, click Save. The chopper window now contains the file you just created, and you could add this file to your project from here. But the process has also created a new clip and added it to the Guitar 1 track. Click the Paint Clip Selector button for the Guitar 1 track. In the pop-up menu, you see the Rhythm Guitar Loop clip that you just created as a new PCA file a moment ago from the chopper window. You can also see that this clip is currently selected in the list. You know you don't want the event that holds the originally recorded clip, so select the existing event on this track and press the Delete key to remove it from the project. Now with the Draw tool, start at the beginning of measure 2 and drag through the track to draw on a new event. Since your new loop file is assigned to the Paint and Draw tools, you're drawing an event that uses that clip, as you can see by the event information. The loop icon in the event information identifies this clip as a loop file. Draw the event out for the entire length of the song. Now, take Acid Pro out of loop playback mode and play the song from the beginning to hear how it sounds with this new clip in place.
When I see this standing waving from the other shore, can we take any more? Oh, can we take any more? Can we take any more?
When we decided to enhance the MIDI editing capabilities of Acid Pro and combine them with the application's now famous loop-based tools, it became obvious that all that was lacking to make the software a complete, powerful digital audio workstation were multi-track audio tools. And naturally, that was all the motivation we needed. In this class, we'll explore Acid Pro's exciting new multi-track audio recording, editing, and mixing tools. You'll learn how to set your system up for a multi-track session, record that session, and then work with your tracks to make great mixes. In order to record audio into Acid Pro, you'll have to have both the hardware and software components of your system properly configured. Now, so many possible variations exist that all I can really do is to show you my setup. I'll record 2 guitars simultaneously onto 2 separate tracks in Acid Pro. Of course, the gear I have in my studio differs from your setup. Therefore, you might want to watch this lesson through one time without trying to follow along. Then you'll know what you need to do in order to configure your own hardware for a successful multi-track recording session. Open Catch-up number 6 from the class number 3 folder on the companion disc. Now that you've solved the sloppy guitar playing problem and dressed your drum track up a bit, you're thinking that things are shaping up pretty nicely when you get a call from the vocalist who says that she's really not happy with her performance. She feels the problems all stem from the fact that the song was too close to the bottom of her comfortable range and she'd like to sing it in the key of A instead of G. Well, bringing her back in to redo her vocals isn't too big of a hassle, but what about all the instrument tracks? Do we really have to bring the players back in so they can lay down new tracks in the key of A? When you start thinking about the huge waste of time and money that translates to, you can really get depressed. But Acid Pro gives you tools to achieve a much less painful fix. We'll use Acid's traditional pitch matching tools to again fix the problem without having to re-record any of the instrument tracks. Let's get the project set up and ready for our vocalist to come in and record her part in A. First, change the project key for the song to A. Play the project. As usual, the drums don't react to the pitch change since they are considered non-pitched instruments. Notice that the bass track has changed the pitch, but the other tracks have remained in the key of G. Why? Let's start with the tracks you recorded. By default, Acid Pro creates beatmap tracks when you record. Choose Options, Preferences, and click the Audio tab. Click the Acid Type for Recorded Audio drop-down and notice that you could set the application up to record as a one-shot instead. But for now, leave beatmap selected and click the Cancel button to close the Preferences dialog without making any changes. The benefit to recording your files as beatmapped is that they can then contain pitch and tempo information, whereas a one-shot file does not. If you never intend to change the pitch or tempo of a project that contains the files you record, a one-shot works perfectly well. But if, as in our exercise here, we decide that we want to change the pitch or tempo of the project, the information embedded into a beatmapped file makes the process much easier. Although you recorded those tracks as beatmapped files, Acid Pro did not embed pitch information into the files. This is because the software had no way of knowing what type of instrument you were recording. For instance, if you had recorded a non-pitched instrument like a tambourine or drums, you wouldn't want the pitch of that instrument to change if you changed the project pitch. Therefore, by default, Acid sets the pitch information for your recorded tracks to Don't Transpose. In this case, you've recorded pitched instruments, and you do want the tracks to react to project pitch changes. You can easily set them up to do so. First, delete the event on the vocal track since you'll be recording a new one in a few moments. Also, mute the MIDI folder track to take the MIDI-generated sounds out of the mix for a few minutes. Now, start with the Guitar 2 track. Right-click the event on the track and choose Clip Properties from the menu. In the Clip Properties window, click the Stretch tab. You see the current root note setting of Don't Transpose for this clip. You also know that you recorded the file in the key of G. You know that because that's the key that your original Acid Pro project was set to and the key in which your guitarists played. Click the root note drop-down and choose G from the list. Notice that the original tempo for this file already matches the project tempo. This value was added to the file during the recording session. Now that Acid Pro has a pitch to start from, it knows how to adjust the pitch of this clip in order to match it to the project pitch. Close the Clip Properties window. You'll also need to deal with the rhythm guitar track in the same way. Even though you're no longer using the originally recorded clip, the loop that you've used was created from the original file and thus has not been assigned a root note. Right-click the event in the rhythm guitar track and choose Clip Properties. Click the Stretch tab and assign this clip a root note of G. Close the Clip Properties window. Now play your project from the beginning. The guitar is now playing the key of A along with the bass loop. Now let's deal with the MIDI tracks. Since, as you've learned, MIDI tracks are fundamentally different than audio tracks, we're not able to assign a root note to them, so you'll use a different technique to deal with the pitch issue. First, unmute the MIDI folder track and click the Expand Track Roles button so that you can see the individual MIDI tracks. Of the 3 MIDI tracks, only the first 2 contain pitched sounds, so you won't have to worry about the third. Recall that in the Looping Basics class you changed the pitch of individual events with the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. You can use the same techniques here, only instead of shifting the pitch of the events on the MIDI tracks, you'll shift the pitch of the entire track. Click the track icon for the organ track and press the plus key 2 times. Each time you do, you raise the pitch of the track by 1 semitone, and since A is 2 semitones higher than G, 2 presses gets you to where you need to be. A small indicator appears to the right of the scribble strip to show that you've changed the pitch of the track. Now, any file that you add to this track will play 2 semitones higher than its normal pitch. Use the same technique to raise the pitch of the synth track by 2 semitones. Click the Collapse Track Rolls button on the folder track again to reclaim some space on the screen. By the way, if you were still feeding the mixed MIDI track to a headphone mix, that track would work fine as it is because when you rendered your MIDI tracks to the new mixed track, Acid Pro embedded the root note information into it so that it reacts automatically to the change in project pitch. Play the project to verify that everything plays in the same key now and that you're ready to bring your vocalist back into the studio. Now you're ready to bring your vocalist back in to re-record her part. Open the project Catch-Up Number 7 from the Class Number 3 folder on the companion disc. Click the Arm for Record button in the Vocals track and repeat the process of setting your record levels properly. Don't forget to engage input monitoring. Once you and the vocalist are all set, click the Record button and record her vocals in the key of A.
I see them standing, waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take any more? Can we take any more?
When you're done recording, name the file Vocals in A. Let's say you're not happy with the way she sang the first "Can We Take Any More?" Rather than re-record the entire vocal track again, let's use punch-in techniques to fix just the phrase you don't like. The phrase we want to replace starts during measure 18, so there's no reason to play through the entire song. Place your cursor at the beginning of measure 16. You don't want to select the existing event, so click in a blank area of the timeline at measure 16 to place the cursor. You'll start playback from there. That'll give her 2 measures of pre-roll so that she can get her bearings in the song before she has to sing the phrase. In a moment, I'll have you play the project, then click the record button when she finishes singing the phrase just before the one you're punching in, and click the record button again when you want to punch back out. When you're both ready, go ahead. When you're done with the punch-in, stop playback.
Can we take any more? Can we take any more?
This punch-in process adds a new event that lays over the top of the existing event and holds the newly recorded clip. This means that you haven't destroyed the original recording. To get the original recording back, just delete the new event. The clip remains in your clip selector list, so you could paint it back in if you want to. The method you just used works perfectly well when you're creating punch-ins on the fly, and perhaps you don't know exactly where you'll need to punch in and out. But in this case, we do know the exact location of our punch-in target, and we can use a different punch-in method that will result in a little bit more organized project. First, isolate the phrase you want to punch into in its own event. To do that, split the main vocal event at the beginning of measure 18 and the beginning of measure 20. This creates a separate event that lasts for the same 2 measures that the vocal phrase does. Click the new event to select it. Again, you want to place your cursor at measure 16 to provide the vocalist a bit of pre-roll. But if you click in the timeline at measure 16, you'll not only place the cursor, but you'll also deselect the event into which you want to punch, and you don't want to do that. So double-click the Beats and Measures display and type 16.1.0, which means the 16th measure, the first beat, and no ticks. Press the Enter key to finalize the change. The cursor jumps to that location, and the event remains selected. When you have an event selected like this, you can safely begin recording immediately. Acid Pro won't replace any data in the timeline until the cursor reaches the selected event. When your vocalist is ready, click the record button.
Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take
When the cursor passes the selected event, Acid Pro stops replacing data. In other words, only the data in the selected event has been replaced with the newly recorded data. In the Recorded Files dialog, name the new file Vocal Punch In 2 and click the Done button. As I mentioned, this creates a bit more of an organized file because now the new punch-in recording appears as a clip in the same event as the original recording. Right-click the punch-in event and choose Event Clip from the pop-up menu. You can see that this new event now contains 4 clips: the original clip in G you recorded a while back, the new recording in A, the on-the-fly punch-in that you recorded a few moments ago, and finally, the new punch-in you recorded just now. You can now select any of those clips and assign it to this event. Our vocalist is still not happy and wants to try a few more times. You can set the project up to loop through a section that includes the selected event and record every time playback comes back around to the event. First, create a loop region that starts at measure 16 and ends at measure 21. This gives the vocalist a bit of both pre-roll and post-roll so she can stay in time with the song. Click the loop playback button. When she's ready, click the record button and have her sing the phrase each time it comes up. I'll try 4 different passes, and from that, we should get at least one that we like.
Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take any more? Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take any more? Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take any more? Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more?
When she's sung the 4th pass, click the stop button. Even though you've recorded 4 passes, you've really only recorded 1 file. Acid Pro divides that file into 4 clips for you, as you'll see in a moment. In the Recorded Files dialog, rename the file Multi-Punches in A and click the Done button. If you need to, zoom in a little so that you can see the entire clip name in the event information for the punch-in clip. Notice that it shows the last of the 4 clips you just recorded. Right-click the event and choose Event Clip from the pop-up menu. In the Cascading menu, you can see the 4 new Multi-Punches in A clips. You can use the 2 commands at the very bottom of the Cascading menu to scroll through the various clips in this track. Notice the keyboard shortcuts for both options. Without selecting any option, click the event again to hide the menus. Since the 4th of your new clips currently occupies the event, type Shift-C to scroll to the previous clip. Keep scrolling back until the first of the 4 clips shows. Not only can you scroll through the clips with these shortcuts, but you can also do so while listening to the project. You're still in loop playback mode. Click the play button and listen to the current take.
Waving from the other shore. Can we take any more?
After the take plays, type C to scroll to the next take. Continue doing this until you've heard all 4 of the new takes.
Can we take any Can we take any more? Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take any more? Here they're standing and waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take
I like the first of the 4 best, so press Shift-C to scroll back to that take. Now that you've got all the tracks recorded, it's time to turn your attention to mixing and the powerful mixing tools available in Acid Pro. Click the Arm for Record button for the vocal track to disarm it and take the application out of loop playback mode. Open the file Catch-up number 8 from the class number 3 folder on the companion disk. Back in the Basics class in this DVD package, you learned to add envelopes to automate your mixes. For example, you added an envelope to the master bus to create the fade-out ending on this project. To remind yourself what that envelope looks like, choose View Show Bus Tracks if they're not already visible. With the blue envelope line, you automated the volume of the master bus. Choose View, Show Bus Tracks to hide the bus track section again. When you created the envelopes that you added earlier, you manually added points to that envelope, and then moved the points to create the automation you wanted. While you'll certainly use this technique many times, it can be very helpful to create the automation in real time while you listen to the project. The new automation record tools give you the power to do exactly that. Let's automate the volume of the lead guitar track so that it starts out at full volume, dips down when the singing starts, and then comes up a little, but not all the way, when the guitar starts at the main riff again. While we could certainly create the envelope manually, we might get more satisfying results if we record volume changes that we make while listening to the song. Each track header contains another new button called the Automation Settings button. Click the Automation Settings button, currently labeled Touch, which I'll explain in a few moments, for the Guitar 2 track. This changes the faders on this track from the standard faders to the automation faders. Now play the project from the beginning. When the vocalist begins singing, lower the volume automation fader about 6 dB. Instantly, this creates an automation envelope that reacts to the changes that you make in the fader level. Now, release the mouse button to let go of the fader. The fader returns to its starting position, and that sets the envelope back to 0.0 dB. That's not really what you wanted. You want it to stay at the lower level until you move the fader again. Stop playback. Click the Undo button to undo the envelope change. Play the project again and drop the volume by around 6 dB in the same place as you did a moment ago, but this time don't release the mouse button. Continue to hold the mouse button and raise the volume to about -2 dB just before the guitar comes in with the main riff again. Hold the mouse button down until the song ends, then release it. You now have the automation you want on this track. Play the track and watch the automation volume fader react to the envelope settings as you hear the results in the volume of the track.
I see her standing, waving from the other shore. Can we take any more? Can we take any more? Can we take any more?
While continuing to hold the mouse button worked for you in this case, it can, in some situations, be cumbersome. But you saw that if you release the mouse button, the fader returns to its starting position. That's when the automation settings options come in handy. As I mentioned, the automation settings button currently reads Touch. This indicates that the fader is in touch mode. In touch mode, the fader returns to its starting position when you release it. That's what you saw a moment ago. Click the automation settings drop-down arrow. You have 4 different options here. First, play the project again and choose Off from the automation settings drop-down. This ignores the envelope so that you no longer hear its effects, even though you can still see that it's on the track. choose Read from the drop-down list and play the project again. Now the envelope affects the track again, but notice that the automation faders are unavailable and you can't record any automation changes. You're already familiar with the automation right touch mode, and you saw earlier that in that mode, the fader returns to its starting position when you release it. Choose Automation Right Latch from the list. To see how this mode works, first right-click the track header and choose Insert Remove Envelope Volume to remove the existing envelope. Now, play the project again and lower the volume by around 6 dB in the same place as you did last time. Release the mouse button. In latch mode, the fader does not return to its original position, but stays where it is when you release it. Now you can relax until the point at which you want to bring the volume up again. When playback reaches that point, raise the fader to around -2 dB and release it. It stays at that point unless you adjust it again. Another new automation tool comes in handy when you want to make on-the-fly adjustments to an existing envelope. Let's say that you would like the envelope that you just created to start ramping up from -6 dB to -2 dB a little sooner. You could drag the envelope points up to a new position, but you might like to make several adjustments as you listen to the song. Play the project starting just before the vocals come in. After she sings a couple of lines, point to the envelope line and hold the Shift key. The mouse icon changes to indicate that you've entered Envelope Edit mode. Now click the envelope and move the mouse. You are literally redrawing the envelope as you move across the track. Before we move on, I should mention that you have automation controls for panning on every track and the bus sends on each track. Also, all of the buses in your project have their own automation controls. You can use these to record bus automation in the same way that you created track automation here. Click the Automation Settings button for the Guitar 2 track to disable the automation controls. To make Acid Pro an even more powerful digital audio workstation, we've included support for external surface controllers. This enables you to mix your project with the hands-on, tactile feedback of hardware knobs, buttons, and faders. In this lesson, you'll learn how to set up the Tascam FW1082 control surface, just one of the many available control surface options. First, follow the manufacturer's instructions to install the drivers for your control surface. Then, connect the control surface to your computer and turn it on. In the case of the Tascam FW1082, when you do this, the FW1082 control panel opens. On the Settings tab, change the Control Protocol setting to Mackie Control Emulation. Leave all other settings as they are and click the Close button. Now start Acid Pro and open Catch-up number 9 from the Class number 3 folder on the companion disk. This is the multi-track project that you've been working on throughout this class. In Acid, choose Options, Preferences, and click the MIDI tab. Select all of the FW1082 MIDI ports for both playback and input, then click Apply. Click the External Control and Automation tab. From the Available Devices drop-down, choose Mackie Control and click the Add button. Mackie Control now appears in the Device column in the Active Control Devices list. Double-click the Mackie Control in the Active Control Devices list to open the Configure Mackie Control dialog. From the Device Type drop-down, choose Emulated Mackie Control Device and then click the Scan button. Set both the MIDI Input and MIDI Output drop-down lists to FW1082 Control. Finally, click OK to close the Configure Mackie Control dialog and then OK to dismiss the Preferences dialog. Now, choose Options, External Control to activate communication between Acid and your control surface. Immediately, you should notice some fader movement on your control surface as the controls adjust to match the settings on your tracks in Acid. Now you have control over your project through the external control surface. Press the play button on your control surface. The project begins to play. You can see in the master meters that the project peaks just above -6 dB, and while that's an acceptable level, you might want to boost the overall volume a bit. Adjust the master fader on your control surface. Experiment with the remaining FW1082 controls to see how they interact with Acid. In this example, I've used a controller for which a controller map already exists in Acid Pro. However, you can use any MIDI controller and create your own custom map to make it control Acid exactly as you want it to. For instance, most MIDI controllers have, in addition to their piano-style keys, several other types of controls in the forms of knobs, faders, and other user interface devices. You can create a controller map in Acid that takes any of the available controls on the MIDI controller and assigns them to adjust whatever you want them to in Acid. Let's take a quick look at how to do this. First, connect your MIDI controller to your computer via your MIDI interface. Install all the proper drivers for your controller if you haven't done so already. Then, choose Options, Preferences, and go to the MIDI tab. If they're not already open, open the MIDI ports to which you've connected the controller. Click the External Control and Automation tab. Choose Generic Control from the Available Devices drop-down and then click the Add button. A new generic control device appears in the Active Control Devices list. Right-click the new device and choose Configure from the pop-up menu. Since no map exists for your controller, you'll need to create one. Assuming that, like mine, your controller has a bank of faders, let's assign the faders to control track volume. Choose Audio Channels from the View Function Group drop-down list. Next, select the Learn checkbox. This sets Acid into a mode where it waits for a signal from your controller and assigns that signal to the selected host command. Select the appropriate MIDI port from the MIDI Input and MIDI Output drop-down lists. Now you're ready for Acid to learn the function of your controller controls. Click Channel 1 Fader in the host command list to select it. On your controller, adjust the fader number 1. You've just assigned fader number 1 on your controller to control the volume fader on track 1 of your Acid project. Naturally, you could continue assigning controls to Acid functions in this manner, but for now, let's say we're done. You can save the map you just created. Click the Save As button, give the map a name and choose a save location, and click Save. Click OK to close the Configure Generic Control dialog, and then OK again to close the Preferences dialog. Now, adjust the first fader on your controller and watch your Acid project as the volume fader for track 1 adjusts according to your controller fader movements. You now have external surface control of volume on track 1. If you want to continue mapping controls, return to the Preferences dialog and repeat the learn steps of the process. As you've seen here, the term multitrack covers an awful lot of ground. You've learned a great deal in this class, and not only about multitrack audio, maybe even more importantly, you've discovered countless tips and techniques that you can use to streamline your workflow, quickly and creatively solve problems that might otherwise cost you dearly in terms of time and money, and, to put it plainly and simply, just make you an all-around more powerful audio producer. Let's explore some of the essential techniques you'll need to understand in order to work effectively with inline MIDI editing mode active. Reopen the project MIDI Join from the class number 4 folder. Do not save your work from the last lesson. Click the Enable Inline MIDI Editing button to activate it if it's not already active. As you learned in the MIDI Basics class, in this mode you can edit your MIDI note events on the timeline. Click the Maximize Track Height button to ensure that you can see all of the MIDI note events on the timeline. It's important to keep the distinction between the MIDI note events you see here and the MIDI event that holds them. When not in inline MIDI editing mode, you can only work with the MIDI events, and you can't do anything with the individual MIDI note events. However, in inline MIDI editing mode, you can manipulate both the MIDI event and the MIDI note events that they hold. The distinction is easy once you understand it. Basically, if you want to manipulate MIDI note events, you'll work in the MIDI note lanes on the timeline. You did quite a bit of this back in the MIDI Basics class. On the other hand, if you want to manipulate the MIDI event itself, you'll work in the event bar above the MIDI note lanes that holds the name of the event. Say you want to move the Clip 2 event. You know that in general, to move something in Acid, you just drag it to wherever you want it. With the Draw tool, drag through one of the MIDI note lanes within the Clip 2 event. This does not move the event, rather it draws a new MIDI note into the targeted note lane. Click the Undo button. To move the MIDI event, drag the event name bar. This moves the event and all of the MIDI information that it contains. Similarly, right-click a note lane and notice the options in the context menu. Now, right-click a MIDI note event to see different options related to the note event. Finally, right-click the event name bar and notice that you have still different options. So, if you want options related to MIDI notes specifically, right-click a MIDI note event or a blank space in the MIDI note lane area. On the other hand, if you want options related to the MIDI event, right-click the event name bar. As an example, right-click a MIDI note event in the Clip 2 event and choose Delete from the menu. This deletes just the note on which you clicked. Next, right-click the event name bar for the Clip 2 event and choose Delete. This deletes the entire event. Of course, it does not delete Clip 2 from the clip selection list. Another important distinction to understand relates to what happens when you drag inside the MIDI note lanes or the event name bar, but outside of an existing MIDI event. To see this distinction, first make Clip 1 the active clip in the Paint Clip Selector dropdown. Position your mouse within the event name bar, but outside of either of the existing MIDI events. Now drag. When you do this, you paint in a new event that uses the selected clip. In other words, you've just drawn another event that uses Clip 1. Now point to a note lane outside of the existing events and drag. This creates a new, empty clip. The clip now appears in your clip list. You can now build MIDI note events into the new clip with the drawing methods you already know. Customized by Native Instruments specifically for Acid Pro 6, the Acid Compact Sampler makes a great addition to your digital audio workstation. Let's start with a short description of a sampler for those of you who've never used one, and then move into using Acid Compact. Samplers are similar to synthesizers, yet fundamentally different in an important way. Unlike a synthesizer, which, as its name implies, creates or synthesizes the sounds from scratch, a sampler uses actual audio recordings to play the sound. Since the sounds a sampler plays are real, samplers typically sound more realistic than synthesizers, although of course much depends upon the quality of the sample sounds and the sampler itself. Virtual Studio Instruments, or VSTIs, like Acid Compact, load the samples into RAM or stream them directly from your computer hard drive. Acid Compact comes with about 2 gigabytes of exclusive samples that were installed when you installed the application. You'll experiment with some of that content as we progress in this class. We'll use Acid Compact during much of the advanced MIDI discussion, so if you haven't done so already, install and register your copy of Acid Compact now. In the MIDI Basics class, I touched on the fact that Acid reacts differently when you add a MIDI file with open MIDI ports as opposed to closed MIDI ports. Let's explore this a little further. Choose Options, Preferences, and click the MIDI tab. Click the Default All button to deselect any currently selected ports and click OK. From the Explorer window, find the file MIDI track from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk and drag it into the timeline. Since you have no open MIDI ports, Acid adds the file to the timeline, adds a soft synth bus to the mixer, and assigns the DLS soft synth to that bus. This should look familiar to you from the MIDI Basics class. Play the project to hear what that track sounds like through the DLS soft synth. In this case, we don't want to use the DLS soft synth, so we need to change the bus assignment. Make the track header a little taller so you can more easily see all of the track controls. In the mixer, double-click the title bar for the DLS soft synth bus. This opens the Soft Synth Properties window, which shows you the interface for the soft synth. The DLS soft synth's simplistic interface features a list of voices, and a virtual keyboard that you can use to hear how the selected voice sounds. Since you want to use Acid Compact, you'll need to assign it to this bus instead of the DLS Soft Synth. Click the Edit Soft Synth button. This opens the Soft Synth chooser, and if you've correctly installed Acid Compact, you see Compact Sony Acid Pro Edition listed in the product list. Select it from the list and click OK. Now that you've assigned Acid Compact to the Soft Synth bus, you see the considerably more robust Acid Compact interface in the Soft Synth property window. Play the project again. You hear nothing. Unlike the DLS Soft Synth, Acid Compact doesn't provide a default sound, and so you'll have to specify one. Before we do that, let's explore the other scenario where you add the MIDI file when you do have MIDI ports open. First, close the Soft Synth Properties window and start a new project. Choose Options, Preferences again, and return to the MIDI tab. Select the appropriate MIDI ports that enable Acid to communicate with your MIDI hardware device. Click OK. Now, add a MIDI track to your project again. This time, Acid does not open a Soft Synth bus for you because the open MIDI ports indicate that you want to use something other than the default DLS Soft Synth to interpret the MIDI information on this track. You can easily assign a Soft Synth to the track manually. Make the track header a bit taller so that you can more effectively see all of the track's controls. Click the Device Selection button, and from the drop-down list, choose Insert Soft Synth. Choose Compact Sony Acid Pro Edition from the list of available soft synths in the Soft Synth chooser, and click OK. The Acid Compact interface opens inside the Soft Synth Properties window. Since we will use Acid Compact during our advanced MIDI discussion, let's take a moment to get familiar with the Soft Synth's interface. Actually, you can get started very quickly with just a bit of basic understanding of two sections of the interface. First, you'll load sounds into the sampler in the Multi section. You can load up to 8 instruments into the sampler at once. You can then assign each instrument to a key range or to a specific channel. Further, you can load in any of the sounds that come included with Acid Compact, or you can load in any other sound and assign them to the Compact keyboard. For instance, you can load in one-shot files from your collection of Sony Sound Series loops and samples and play them through Acid Compact. Let's load an instrument now. Click the Instrument 1 drop-down arrow and choose Piano and Keys Concert Grand from the drop-down menu. You've now assigned that instrument as Instrument 1. Play the project again. Acid Compact produces a far superior sounding piano than the DLS Soft Synth that you listened to a moment ago. Stop playback. You can use the keyboard at the bottom of the Acid Compact interface to preview the chosen sound. Click a key in the keyboard area to hear the sound. As you click different keys, you can hear the realism of this piano sound. Naturally, if you have an external MIDI controller connected to Acid, you can play the sounds with that controller instead of this virtual keyboard. Back up in the Multi area, you see that you can add up to 8 different instruments. Click the Instrument 2 drop-down arrow and choose Organ, 1960s Organ from the drop-down list. Acid Compact assigns the new instrument to the next available MIDI channel, in this case, Channel 2. Now, you can change the channel assignment on your MIDI track to use Channel 2, change the channel setting for the instrument so that both instruments play to MIDI Channel 1 simultaneously, duplicate the track and send one to Channel 1 and the other to Channel 2. Well, you get the idea. You have a lot of flexibility with Acid, Acid Compact, and the MIDI tools. One of the most powerful features of a good sampler is that you can assign your sounds to it and thus map out your own instrument. The one-shot files that you'll find in most of your Sony Sound Series loops and samples discs work perfectly for this. Let's see how it works. In the Multi section, click the Browser button. This opens a Windows Explorer-like browser window. Navigate to the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk and into the Sounds to Map folder. To open the folder and see its contents, click the folder name in the browser. The folder contains several percussive one-shot files. Click the first empty instrument label to select it. The empty instrument has a channel setting of Omni, meaning that it currently routes to all 16 channels. Now, drag one of the files from the browser and drop it onto one of the keys on the keyboard section. The key changes color to show that a sound has been assigned to it. Change the channel setting to Channel 3. Click the key to hear the sound. You've just mapped that sound to the particular key on the keyboard. Drag another file to the keyboard, but this time move your mouse up until you see several keys highlighted. When you do, release the mouse. You've just assigned that sound to each of those highlighted keys. Click the keys in succession and notice that they've each been assigned a pitch so that you can now actually play a melody with that sound. You can continue to map sounds to the keyboard for this instrument in this manner. The remaining areas in Compact relate to altering and shaping the sound you've just loaded. We could spend a lot of time talking about each of these sections, but you now know enough to use Acid Compact in the upcoming Advanced MIDI discussions. At some point, you'll want to come back to Acid Compact and experiment with all the different settings to hear what sounds you can come up with. For now, click the Browser button to close the browser window. Close the Soft Synth Properties window, and let's move into the Advanced MIDI features in Acid Pro 6. Let's take a little closer look at how MIDI events work on the timeline. Open the project MIDI Join from the class number 4 folder on the companion disk. The project uses Acid Compact for the soft synth, so if you haven't installed Acid Compact yet, you should do so before you continue with this lesson. You worked with clips in the multi-track audio class. You can make great use of clips when working with MIDI tracks too. Notice in this project that you have 2 distinct MIDI events on the track. Play the project. As you can hear, the 2 events are similar, yet slightly different. Notice that the 2 events have different names. This indicates that the 2 events use different MIDI clips. Click the Paint Clip Selector button and notice that the drop-down list contains both clips, just like you saw on audio tracks in the multi-track audio class. So naturally, you can choose the clip you want and paint more events into the timeline with the Paint or Draw tools. But what if you decide that you want the sequence of these 2 events combined to loop through the length of your project? Right-click the second event and choose Event Clip Loop. Now edge trim the right edge of the second event to the right to make it longer. As you do, you see that you're not creating a loop of the entire 2-event sequence, rather you're simply looping the drum beat 2 clip for the length of this event. Not what you wanted. Click the Undo button. You could copy both events and then paste them over and over until you fill your entire project with the sequence, but that would create multiple events on the timeline that could make your project more confusing. For a more effective solution to this problem, let's join these 2 events into one. Click the first event to select it. Hold the Control key and click the second event to add it to the selection. With both events selected, right-click either of them and choose Join from the pop-up menu. Acid combines the MIDI data from each event into a new clip, combines the 2 events, and fills the resulting event with the new clip. Notice that the space between the 2 original events appears in this new clip as silence. Click the Paint Clip Selector button and choose Clip Pool from the drop-down list. The Clip Pool shows that you now have 3 clips assigned to this track and that the original 2 clips have use counts of 0. If it helps to keep your project organized, right-click the newly created clip, which has a use count of 1, and choose Rename from the menu. Name the clip New Clip. Now that you have this combined clip, edge trim it to make it last for the length of your project. Trim it so that it lasts at least to measure 11. Back in the clip pool, click the Loop button to turn looping on for this clip. Now the clip loops inside this event so that the pattern repeats itself for as long as you make the event. Play the project again to hear your looping drum pattern. Let's say you want to remove the silence in the middle of the clip. You don't want to fill it, you simply want to remove it so that the second half of the pattern immediately follows the first. Click the Undo button as many times as it takes to get back to the point in your project where you have your 2 original separate events filled with different clips. Edge trim the right edge of the first clip back to the beginning of measure 3. Now, to avoid including the space between the 2 events as silence in the joined clip, move the second event so that it starts at the end of the first event. Join the 2 clips, renaming the resulting clip in the clip pool if you want to. Turn looping on for the new clip, and edge trim the new event out to at least the beginning of measure 9. Play the project to hear the results. Back in the MIDI Basics class, you quantized a series of MIDI note events to correct for timing errors on a MIDI drum part that I recorded. You can do much more with quantization than just adjusting the start time of your MIDI note events, and quantization is just one of the MIDI processes and filters that you can use to alter your MIDI note events. Let's talk in more detail about each of these processes and filters. Open the project MIDI Quantize from the class number 4 folder on the companion disk. Again, this project uses the Acid Compact Soft Synth, so if you've not loaded it, you should do so now. For now, leave track 2 muted, or muted if it isn't already. Zoom in a bit so that you can see at least half note marks on the beat ruler. Play the project. You can see by looking at the MIDI note events that the notes have different length values and that they don't start directly on the beat. You could probably hear the unevenness of the melody's timing, too. Some notes are early, some late, and some last for more than a quarter note while some last for less. We can fix all these notes up quickly with quantization. Right-click any of the notes in the track and choose Select All in Event from the menu. Right-click a note again and choose MIDI Processes and Filters from the menu. Click the Quantize tab if you need to in order to work with quantization controls. Select the Quantize Start checkbox. Recall from the MIDI Basics class that this forces all of the selected notes to start at the nearest note value that you specify in the Quantize grid area. Click the Quarter Note button so that you'll quantize each of these notes to start on the nearest quarter note. Click Apply, and each note moves to the nearest quarter note. You can see that this causes a different problem with the 4th note because it makes it very short. In fact, play the project and notice that you don't even hear the note now. Click the Undo button to set the notes back to their unquantized state again. Select the Preserve Duration button and click the Apply button again. Now you've quantized the note starts and preserved the duration of the notes. Click the Undo button again. Instead of quantizing the note start values, let's work with the note release values. Of course, you can work with individual notes too. Click the 3rd MIDI note event to select just that one. Select the Quantize Release checkbox. Deselect the Quantize Start checkbox and click the Apply button. The end of the note snaps to the nearest quarter note. Click the Undo button again. Click the 2nd note event to select it, then select both the Quantize Start and Quantize Release checkboxes. Notice that this overrides your ability to preserve the duration of the note. Click Apply. Both the note start and the note release values snap to the nearest quarter note. Undo that edit. At times you may not want to quantize exactly to a perfect grid. For instance, you might want to get closer to starting on a quarter note, but leave a little sloppiness to give more of a human feel to the composition. One way to accomplish this is to offset the grid before you quantize. With the 2nd note still selected, select the Offset By checkbox and enter a value of 50 ticks. Select just the Quantize Start checkbox at the top of the dialog. Click Apply. If you need to, zoom into your project and notice that the note, which, while it has been quantized, does not sit exactly at the quarter note mark. Click Undo. You can also quantize to tuplets, such as the common triplet, where 3 notes occur during the time of 2 notes. To see this, mute track 1 and unmute track 2. Play the project. The 2nd beat of the first 2 measures contain triplet notes on the ride cymbal that were sloppily recorded so that they don't quite have the right timing. Stop playback after the 2nd measure. To make this easier to see, choose Options, Grid Spacing, 8th note triplets. Zoom in far enough that you can see each quarter note on the beat ruler. Notice that each quarter of a measure now has 2 grid marks in it. These grid marks identify the proper location of 8th note triplets, and you can see that the triplets in this project don't fall precisely on the grid marks. Select the 6 triplet note events. In the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog, select 8th note for the note value, select just the Quantize Start checkbox in the top section of the dialog, and then the Tuplet checkbox in the center section. Leave the settings as they are at 3 in time of 2, so that you'll be quantizing to 3 note divisions in the space normally occupied by 2 8th notes. Click Apply. You can see the triplet notes adjust so that they match the 8th note triplet grid marks perfectly. Play the project and hear the difference this quantization makes. Deselect the Tuplet checkbox and set your grid marks back to ruler marks. Now let's work with the Options settings a bit. The Swing setting adjusts the grid at every other beat of a triplet based on the note value you've chosen in the grid. This gives you a way to create a jazz swing feel. Let's see it in action. Place your cursor at the beginning of measure 4 and play the project. The ride cymbals on straight eighth notes don't swing at all. Stop playback. We'll quantize the ride cymbal note events to swing on eighth note triplets. First, select just Quantize Start in the top section. Then, click the eighth note button in the Quantize grid. Now, in the Options section, you'll notice that the swing slider settings range from 0 to 300%. A setting of 0 means that you'll quantize straight to the grid, as you've mostly been doing so far. Think of 0% as the first triplet mark on the beat. For each 100% increment in the swing slider setting, you shift the timing of every other note in the grid by one triplet value. In this case, by one eighth note triplet value. In the timeline, select all of the ride cymbal note events in measures 4 and 5. In the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog, set the swing slider to 100%. Click Apply. You can see the note events shift and that the operation affects only every other note event. Play measures 4 and 5 of the project and see how much better the ride cymbal worked with the kick drum now that those note events swing. Click the Undo button. The Strength slider lets you set the strictness of the quantization. At 100%, the Strength slider causes quantization to adhere strictly to the grid. At 50%, however, quantization will move the note event start, or release, only half the distance to the grid. In other words, at 50% strength, if the start of the note is 40 ticks away from the grid when you quantize it, it will move only 20 ticks toward the grid instead of all the way to the grid, as it would with a strength setting of 100. This is a great way to preserve the natural human timing mistakes that every musician makes, yet making them not quite so noticeable. To see this, look at the brush snare note events in measure 4 and 5. You can see that none of them actually starts precisely on the grid. We'd like to keep some of the human feel evoked by these timing errors, but the timing's just a bit too far off to feel right. Select the 4 brush snare note events. Select just the Quantize Start checkbox in the top section of the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog. Select the quarter note button in the Quantize grid, reset the swing slider to 0%, and set the strength slider to 50%. These settings will cause each of the 4 brush snare note events to move closer to the grid marks by 50% of their present distance away. Click Apply. You can see that the note events still do not start exactly on the grid, but they are closer now than they were a moment ago. Play the 2 measures and notice that the snares sound a bit closer to the proper timing, yet still have a bit of the human feel. In addition to the powerful quantization tools that you worked with in the previous lesson, the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog gives you tools with which to exercise fine control over the velocity of MIDI note events. Let's talk about a couple of velocity techniques and then focus on how you can use the processes and filters to control velocity. Open the project MIDI Velocity from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk. Maximize the track height so you can see things better and play the project. Notice that there are no real dynamics in this drum pattern since all of the events have the same velocity. Let's build some dynamics into this pattern. First, to refresh your memory on how you changed the velocity of a MIDI note event back in the MIDI Basics class, double-click the first snare hit. This shows the note event's velocity value of 64. Recall that when you use the Draw or Paint tools to add MIDI note events to your project, Acid draws them in at the default velocity value of 64. If you checked all of the snare hits, you'd see that they all have a velocity of 64. The drum roll note events also have velocity settings of 64. Change the velocity of this first snare hit to 100. Rather than check each of these note events individually to verify that they have a velocity of 64, choose View, Show Inline MIDI Editing, Note on Velocities. You can now see a graphical representation of the note event velocity values indicated by the vertical lines with diamond tops. As you see, these lines are all the same height, which verifies that the velocities for these notes are all the same. You can use the diamond lines to adjust velocity. Drag the diamond of the first snare hit after the second drum roll up so that it approximately matches the height of that for the first roll event. Double-click the snare hit to see its new velocity. Set the velocity of the first snare hit after the remaining 2 rolls to approximately 100 as well. Play your project to hear the difference these velocity changes have made to the dynamics of the drum pattern. While While both of these methods work just fine for changing node event velocity, if you have a lot of events to work with, the job can quickly get tedious and time-consuming. The Velocity tab of the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog can help automate your work. If you don't still have the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog open, choose Edit, MIDI Processes and Filters, and then click the Velocity tab. Note that with the first two checkboxes, you can specify whether you want to work with the start or end velocity. In this discussion, we'll manipulate start velocities, so leave the Change Start Velocity checkbox selected. You can use the various options in the Change section to manipulate the velocities of the node events that you've selected on the timeline. Let's work with the first group of single snare hits. You've already changed the velocity of the first hit, so select the second node event, hold the Shift key, and select the last node event of the group. This selects all of the snare hits in the first group except for the first one. In the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog, select the Set To radio button and move the Set To slider to 50. As usual, remember that if you're having trouble hitting the exact value with the slider, hold the Control key while you move the slider to make its movement much finer. When you get it set to 50, click Apply. You've just set the velocity of each selected node event to 50. Play through the first set of snare hits to hear the results. Select the Invert radio button and click Apply. This sets the velocity of each selected node event to 77, which in the MIDI scale of 0 to 127 is the exact opposite of 50. That is, if you add 50 to the lowest possible MIDI value of 0, you get 50. If you subtract 50 from the highest possible MIDI value, you get 77. Play through the section again to hear the results. With the Add setting, you can add or subtract from the selected node event's velocity settings. Select all of the node events in the second group of snare hits. They all still have velocity settings of 64. Select the Add radio button and set the slider to 50. Click Apply. This adds 50 to the velocity value of each selected note, with one exception. Since the first note had an initial velocity of 100, when you try to add 50 to it, you hit the 127 maximum value allowed for MIDI settings. In this case, the velocity is set to 127. Now, set the Add slider to -60 and click Apply again. This subtracts 60 from the velocity value of each selected node event. You can also change the velocity on a percentage basis. Working with percentages has the advantage of preserving the proportional distance between various notes, even if they don't have the same velocity to begin with. In other words, if two events have velocity values that are 30% of the MIDI value range away from each other, and you specify values to create your change over time, you might change the percentage difference between the two events. When you change over time by percentage, you can preserve that proportional difference between the two events. Select all of the node events in the first group. Select the Scale by checkbox and set the slider to 30% and click Apply. Notice that this lowers the velocity setting for every selected event, but you can see that the general shape of the row of diamonds has been preserved. In other words, the percentage difference between the values of each event has been preserved. Set the Scale by slider to 150% and click Apply. Again, percentage differences between events have been preserved. Again, the exception to this is if the specified percentage change would push a node event's velocity over the 127 maximum. The Limit radio button works in much the same way as an audio limiter does. Any velocity that falls outside of the range you specify here will be adjusted so that it conforms to the range. Select all the node events on the timeline again and select the Limit radio button. Set the min value to 55 and the max value to 90. Click Apply. Notice the velocities of some node events were raised to conform to the minimum value of the specified range, while others were lowered to conform to the maximum value. Still, other velocities were unchanged because they already conformed to the specified limit range. Select the Change Over Time radio button. This setting lets you specify initial and final settings that Acid will apply over a range of node events across time. You can use this to build a crescendo or decrescendo. Select all the snare hit node events in the last group except for the first event in the group. Select the Change Over Time radio button. Set the From value to 20 and the To value to 100. Set the Curve setting to linear and click Apply. Play that portion of the project to hear the results. To specify a range of percentages, Select the by percentage checkbox. Set the from percentage to 50 and the to percentage to 80. Select the snare hit note events in the last group and click Apply. Play this section to hear the results. You can also determine the shape of the curve that the acid uses to connect the from value to the to value. You just used the linear curve shape. Click Undo to undo the last velocity change. Now set the curve value to slow and click Apply. Play the section to hear the slightly different results. Press the F key on your keyboard to hide the note-on velocity indicators. Just as you used the velocity filters in the previous lesson to control the velocity of MIDI note events, you'll use the duration filters to control the length of MIDI note events. Open the project MIDI Duration from the class number 4 folder on the companion disk. Once again, this project uses Acid Compact, so install that application before you continue with this lesson. Play the project. Now let's manipulate the duration of some of these MIDI note events to change the piece slightly. First, select each of the 3 note events on the C5 note lane and the 2 note events on the G4 note lane. We'll change these notes to hold under the melody. If you don't still have the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog open, right-click one of the selected events and choose MIDI Processes and Filters from the menu. Click the Duration tab. Select the Change By radio button. Click the Change By drop-down arrow. With the 3 options here, you can either set an exact length for the selected notes, or add or subtract a specific value to or from the current note length. Most likely, you'll usually want to specify an exact note length, so let's do that now. Select Setting Duration to from the drop-down list. From the Size drop-down, choose Half Note. You can also specify a dotted value, which adds half the selected value to the selected value. Click the Size drop-down again and choose Dotted. You can see in the note value box that you've specified a 3-beat note length. Click Apply. The 5 selected note events' durations increase according to your settings. Play the project. Click the Size drop-down arrow again and notice the User Size option. We won't do it now, but let me point out that if you can't get the note length you want with any of the other options, choose User Size and then enter the desired note length in the Size field. To change the note values by a given percentage, use the Scale By option. For instance, let's make all the notes in this piece half as long. Right-click one of the note events and choose Select All in Event from the menu. In the MIDI Processes and Filters dialog, select the Scale By radio button and enter a value of 50%. Click Apply. Every note in the project now lasts only half as long as it did before. Play the project and notice that although each note lasts for half its original duration, none of the note start times changed. In other words, the piece isn't any shorter, just the notes are shorter, which gives a more staccato or choppy feeling to the music. However, you can change the note duration and simultaneously change the note event start times. First, click Undo to set the note events back to their original lengths. Leave the Scale By settings at 50% and select the Change Start Times checkbox. In the timeline, select all the notes again. Click Apply. This time, all the event durations are cut in half, and the start times of each moves to fill the holes in your project left by the shorter note times. Play the project again. This results in not only shorter notes, but also a project that finishes in half the time as the original. You can use the limit settings to set upper and lower limits on note event durations. Notice that you now have many 16th note events in your project, several 8th note events, and 5 held note events that last for 1 1/2 beats. Select the Limit radio button. Set the min value to 8th note and the max value to quarter note. Click Apply. Notice that all of the 16th note events changed to match the minimum value of 8th notes, all of the held note event lengths shortened to match the quarter note maximum, and that all of the 8th note events remain unaffected since they already conform to the limit values you specified. In the MIDI Basics class, you learned to use an external MIDI controller to record MIDI information into the ACID timeline. Let's go into a little more detail about using external MIDI devices in conjunction with ACID. Open the project External MIDI from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk. Expand the track header both vertically and horizontally if necessary so that you can see all of its controls. Notice in the mixer that this project contains two soft synths, the DLS and ACID Compact. You might want to route this track to an external MIDI device both for input and output. In other words, you might want to use the external device to record MIDI information into ACID and have ACID route that MIDI information back to the same or maybe a different external MIDI device in order to generate the sound. To communicate with your external MIDI hardware, you'll need to open the lines of communication between the hardware and ACID. Choose Options, Preferences, and in the Preferences dialog, click the MIDI tab. Assuming you've got your external MIDI device properly connected to your computer, you'll see the MIDI ports for that device here. In my case, I have a couple of different ports available for each MIDI playback and MIDI input. To one set of ports, I've connected a hardware synthesizer, and to the other, a simple MIDI controller keyboard. The ports in the top half of the dialog control MIDI track playback, while those in the bottom section control MIDI input. Select the checkboxes for the ports that you want to activate, and make sure that you select at least one input port, and, if your hardware device is a synthesizer or sampler that can generate audio, one playback port. When you've opened all the ports you want, click OK. Let's talk about MIDI input settings. The current input device settings read Auto All. With this setting, ACID receives MIDI information coming in from any open input port, as well as from any open soft synth bus, and sends it along to the specified output device, which generates the audio based on the MIDI instructions. Essentially, this means that you can use any soft synth or hardware equipment to record MIDI information to the timeline. To see this, double-click the DLS soft synth bus in the mixer window. As you've seen, this opens the Soft Synth Properties dialog, which contains a virtual keyboard. Click the Arm for Record button on the MIDI track, and then click the Record button. Now, click any of the keys in the DLS soft synth interface. You can see that you're recording MIDI information. Click the Pause button. Double-click the ACID Compact soft synth bus to open the ACID Compact interface. Record the track again using the ACID Compact keyboard. Notice that you hear the sound generated by the ACID Compact settings rather than the sound specified in the track's output settings. As you just saw, you'll always hear the sound settings of the soft synth from which you generate the MIDI information. You might want to hear the output of the track according to its output settings while you use the interface of a different soft synth to generate the MIDI information. To accomplish this, click the MIDI Input button and choose Send MIDI Input Through to MIDI Output from the list. Now, when you play from the soft synth's interface, you hear both the sound dictated by the soft synth settings and the sound generated by the output settings of the track. Finally, run the experiment again using your external MIDI controller to generate the MIDI information. As you can see, regardless of the soft synth or hardware device you use to play the notes, ACID records the MIDI information. Now click the MIDI Input button. From the drop-down menu, choose Input Off. Now this track will not accept any incoming MIDI information. With the track still armed, click the Record button again and play any of the software or hardware controllers. Since you've turned the input settings for this track off, ACID does not record any MIDI information, regardless of which device generates it, even though you can hear the sound generated by the device on the input stage. You can use the Input Off mode on a track to prevent an accidental recording of MIDI information to that track. Typically, you'll want to do this if the track already contains MIDI information and you don't want to inadvertently record over it with new information. Click the Input Device Selection button again. Notice that each MIDI input device that you have connected to ACID, whether software or hardware, appears in this menu. You can set this track to accept incoming MIDI information from a specific device and ignore the information coming from any other device. Such a situation is closer to the traditional MIDI recording setup and forces you to manually match your input device to the input settings of this track. Your MIDI ports may appear in this list with somewhat less than helpful names. ACID pulls the name from the hardware interface through which your hardware controller plugs to your computer. You can change the name to something more meaningful, for instance, the name of the synth or MIDI controller you've connected to the port. Click the MIDI Input button and select External MIDI Device Preferences from the list to open the Preferences dialog at the MIDI tab. In the list of ports for MIDI input, double-click the text in the Device column of the input port whose name you want to change. Type a new name. For example, I'll use the name of the controller I've connected to this port, the supercontroller. By the way, this technique also works for your output devices. Click OK. Back on the MIDI track, click the Input Device button again, and notice that now the list contains an entry for the supercontroller. This makes it very easy to assign a controller specifically to this track. Choose that controller from the list. With the track armed for record, click the Record button. Now play all of your software and hardware controllers and notice that Acid records only the MIDI information generated by the supercontroller. Stop playback. And finally, notice that you also have a MIDI channel setting drop-down here in the input stage. When you're using an external MIDI controller, make sure to set this track to receive MIDI information from the same channel that your controller sends the information down. Normally, you won't have to worry about this since you'll probably most often leave this track's input channel setting at the default All so that it can receive MIDI information on any MIDI channel. We worked briefly with MIDI output devices back in the MIDI Basics class, so you've learned most of what you need to know already. But let's take a quick look at these settings again, just to make sure we've covered all of them. Open the project MIDI output from the class number 4 folder on the companion disk. In the MIDI track header, click the MIDI output button and choose Output Off. Play the track. As you might expect, you can't hear any audio generated from the MIDI information on this track. You could consider this to be one way to mute a MIDI track. Click the Output Device button again. Notice that all of your soft synths, as well as any open MIDI output ports, appear in the list. Just as with MIDI input ports, if the names of the ports themselves don't help you much, choose External MIDI Device Preferences from the list and use the same techniques you used in the previous section to change the name of your output ports to something more helpful. Close the Preferences dialog. Click the MIDI output button again. Notice that you can add a new soft synth to your project from here, and also, as you saw in the MIDI Basics class, you can assign the output to a specific MIDI channel. Choose an output device from the list and play the project to hear the audio generated by that output device in response to the MIDI information on this track. MIDI information includes much more than just the note data that we've been working with up to now. Sophisticated MIDI controller devices have settings and controls with which you can bend the pitch of a played note, modulate the pitch of a note at specific intervals, manipulate how a controller key reacts to pressure you apply to it after the original touch, and more. Acid provides control over a wide variety of this type of controller data and gives you the tools to automate changes in that controller data just as you've automated volume and panning controls in other classes in this DVD package. Let's take a look at how this works. Open the MIDI Pitch Bend project from the class number 4 folder on the companion disk. Play the project. You can hear that one note plays steadily during the duration of the project. Play the project again, and this time as it plays, adjust the pitch bend slider up and then down. You can hear how this changes the pitch of the note. If you have an external controller, you could play such a pitch bend when you record the MIDI information. Stop playback. Click the name of the pitch bend slider. This reveals a drop-down list of several other MIDI data that you can control with this slider. Choose a different item from the list and notice that now the slider controls that piece of controller data. Controller information relates directly to the device to which you're sending it. If the device does not respond to a particular controller, then you obviously will not hear the results of making changes to that controller. Set the slider back to pitch bend. The other 3 sliders on the track header also control multiple types of controller data in the same way. Just like the volume and pan controls that you used in earlier classes, you can insert envelopes to adjust controller data over time. Click the Insert Pitch Bend Envelope button to the right of the pitch bend slider. A green envelope line now runs through your track. You can add points to this envelope and then set them differently to create automation. Right-click the envelope at about midway through the project and choose Add Point. Drag the point all the way up to the top of the track. Add another point at the end of the project and drag that point all the way down. Play the project to hear how you've automated the pitch bend on this track. Point to the envelope line, hold the Shift key, and drag over the line. This enables you to draw the envelope in freehand and create whatever shape of envelope you want. The automation record tools that we talked about in the multi-track audio class also work here. Click the Automation Settings button to turn it on. If it's not currently set to touch, click the drop-down arrow and choose Touch from the list. Now play the project and adjust the pitch bend slider. Acid records your adjustments with the automation envelope. Play the project back, and the note's pitch reacts to the movements you just recorded. Click the Insert Pitch Bend Envelope drop-down arrow and select Delete Pitch Bend Envelope from the list to remove the envelope. Experiment with the other controller data sliders to see how they affect your project. MIDI track properties provide even greater control over your MIDI tracks. Open the project MIDI Track Properties from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk. Right-click the track icon for the first track and choose Properties from the pop-up menu. On the Output Settings tab, you can specify the controller map that you want to use on this track. For instance, this track uses Acid Compact as its output device. Acid Compact has its own distinct set of controllers and a controller map that contains specific settings of those controllers. Notice that the controller map field specifies this track uses the Compact Sony Acid Pro Edition controller map. Click the track icon for track 2. This track uses the DLS soft synth for the output device. Back in the Track Properties window, which always shows the track properties for the selected track, notice that the controller map field reflects the different output device. Neither of these controller maps displays all of the available controllers. Select the Show All Controllers checkbox to see a complete list of all 128 MIDI controllers. Notice that some of the controllers checkboxes are selected, while others are not. Deselect the Show All Controllers checkbox to hide the unselected controllers again. Let's say you don't want the modulation controller to show. Deselect its checkbox, and it disappears from the list. Select the Show All Controllers checkbox again. Select the Modulation checkbox, and then deselect the Show All Controllers checkbox. Modulation now appears in the list again because you've selected its checkbox. You can set the default value of any controller in the Def column. You learned in the MIDI Basics class that MIDI tracks have a default volume of 100. Lower the volume of track 2 to 0. Now double-click the volume slider in track 2 to reset it to its default of 100. Change the Def setting for the channel volume to 64. Lower the volume of track 2 to 0 again, and double-click the volume slider. This time it resets to the new default of 64. Set the Def value for channel volume back to 100. You can also manage your controller envelopes from the Track Properties window. For instance, to add a pan envelope, click the envelope drop-down arrow for the pan controller and choose Insert Pan Envelope from the list. A pan envelope now runs through the track. You can use the Curve Type drop-down arrow to specify the type of curve you want to use as the default type when connecting 2 points on a controller's envelope. Click the Envelope drop-down arrow for the pan controller again and choose Delete Envelope to remove the pan envelope from the track. All synthesizers and samplers, whether hardware or software, potentially use unique controller maps. Acid will not always be able to determine the appropriate controller map, particularly in the case of external hardware devices. In these cases, you can specify the map you want to use. Click the Load button. This opens a Browse dialog that points to the location of several controller maps that were loaded onto your system when you installed Acid. Double-click the folder of the manufacturer of your device. Then select the controller map for the specific device and click Open. This loads the controller map for that device into the Track Properties window. If you make changes to a controller map, you can save the map with a new name so that you can reference the map again at a later time. Click the Save button, give the map a new name, and click the Save button to save the new map. You can also control other types of output settings from this dialog. With Track 2 still selected, click the Output Settings Type drop-down arrow and choose Program Change from the list. Use the Program Group drop-down to limit the options to a specific group. Click the program from the list that you want to use on this track. Notice that the Program Selection button changes to reflect the patch you've chosen. Click the Output Settings Type drop-down arrow again and choose Drum Maps from the list. In the same way that different synths use different controller maps, they might also use different maps for their drum patches. Change the patch used in Track 2 to the standard drum kit. Click the Enable Inline MIDI Editing button. As you saw in the MIDI Basics class, a list of the various drum sounds in this patch now appears in the Acid timeline. In the Track Properties dialog, notice that the standard set MIDI drum map template is active. Change the patch to a different patch and notice that the MIDI drum map template changes accordingly. Not all synths provide drum map templates automatically. For instance, Acid Compact does not. Double-click the Acid Compact bus to open the Acid Compact interface. Change Instrument Setting 1 to Drums and Percussion, Acoustic, Jazz Brush Kit. Notice that you do not see a list of drum sounds as you do for Track 2, since Acid Compact doesn't provide that information. Acid does, however, supply the information for you, and you need only retrieve it to use it. Close the Soft Synth Properties dialog. Click the track icon for Track 1 to show Track 1's properties in the Track Properties dialog. Choose Compact Acid Pro Edition. In the Track Properties dialog, select the Jazz Brush Kit checkbox. This applies the drum map, and the names of the drum sounds now appear in the Acid timeline. You can also customize your drum maps or create entirely new ones. Click the Open Editor button. The left side of the drum map editor lists the names of the existing drum maps, while the right side lists the specific mapping. If you're using a synth that doesn't appear in the list on the left, click the Open button. Find your synth and open its drum map. Choose All from the device drop-down and scroll until you find the map you've just added. Select the map and click the Delete button to remove it from the list. If you can't find the appropriate drum map for your synth, you can create your own, and you can either start with an existing map and edit it, or start from scratch. Let's start a completely new drum map. Click the New button. A new map appears in the list. Double-click the MIDI drum map template column to select the name and type in a new one. Double-click the value in the device column and enter the name of the device for which you're creating the new map. Give the map a program number if you think you might be creating more than one map for this device. Use the Drum Map Description field to make any notes about the new map. Now, click the Insert Key button in the section to the right. This inserts the key C0, meaning the C key in the 0 octave on the piano keyboard. Let's say you won't have any sounds applied to any key before C3. Double-click the value C0 and change it to C3. Further, let's say that the drum sound that corresponds to the C3 key is an open hi-hat. Double-click the value of the instrument column and replace it with open hi-hat. You would continue to build the rest of the map in exactly the same way. When you're done building your map, click the OK button. We talked in detail earlier about several MIDI filters including duration and quantization. In the context of our earlier discussion, we considered the use of these filters with MIDI information that had already been recorded. You can also use similar MIDI filters while you're recording MIDI information. For instance, you might use quantization filters to correct playing mistakes as you make them, instead of after the fact. Let's take a look at input filters now. If you don't still have the Track Properties window open from the previous section, open it now. Click the Input Filters tab and choose Message Filter from the Filter Type drop-down list. External MIDI controllers send many different types of MIDI information beyond simple note information. You can use the message filters to record any or all of the messages your controller sends. Select the Enable checkbox and then the appropriate radio button depending upon what messages you want to record, or, looked at a different way, which message you want to filter out. Use the MIDI message type drop-down to access all of the various available messages. Select the checkboxes for the specific messages you want to filter according to the choice you made in the radio buttons above. Choose Velocity and then Quantize from the Filter Type drop-down. We don't need to go through the options here since they are exactly the same as those we discussed earlier in the MIDI processes and filters lesson, and they work the same way. Just make sure to select the Enable checkbox if you want to use these input filters while you record your MIDI information. Close the Track Properties window. You learned the basic method of recording MIDI information to a track in your timeline back in the MIDI Basics class. You can also record in merge mode, which essentially means that you can record multiple passes over the same section of your MIDI track, and on each pass, add additional MIDI information. Let's see how it works. Open the project MIDI Merge from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk. Connect your MIDI controller to an active MIDI port so that you can trigger the drum sounds in this project from your controller. This project uses the DLS soft synth. You're going to record a simple kick drum pattern into this track. To help you with your timing, click the metronome button to activate the metronome. Click the track's Arm for Record button. We'll record 8 measures of our kick drum pattern. Find the key on your controller that triggers the kick drum sound in the DLS soft synth. Make sure your input device is set to Auto All, or specifically to the controller you'll be using to play the kick part. When you're ready, click the Record button and play along with the metronome for 8 measures. Click the Stop button when you're done recording. You've just recorded with the basic record method that you used in the MIDI Basics class. Now let's say that you want to go back and add a snare part to this drum track you're building. Find the key on your controller that triggers the snare drum. Return your cursor to the beginning of the project and click the Record button again. You immediately notice that as you record through the existing MIDI information, Acid replaces that information with whatever you're recording. Click the Stop button. Naturally, you don't want to lose what you've already recorded for the kick drum as you record the snare hits. Rather, you want to add the snare hits to, or in other words, merge them with the existing kick note events. Click the Undo button so that you get the missing kick note events back. Now, click the MIDI Merge Record button. Return the cursor to the beginning of the project and record again. This time, the kick note events remain untouched, and anything you play now gets added to the timeline. Play through to the end of the project and then click Stop. Play the project from the beginning and notice how the snare hits have been merged with the kick drum. Of course, you could continue merging MIDI note events with these existing events until you had assembled the entire drum kit that you want in your project. Click the MIDI Merge Record button to turn off MIDI Merge Record. One of the great things about MIDI technology is that even if you're not completely confident in your playing abilities, you can still assemble complicated musical passages. In the MIDI Basics class, you saw that you can use the Acid Draw and Paint tools to do this. You can also use MIDI Step Record to assemble your track. Many composers use Step Record to help them through a complicated musical passage that they can't play in real time. To use MIDI Step Record mode, start a new project. Choose Insert MIDI Track to add a new MIDI track to the project. Recall that if you still have active MIDI ports, Acid does not insert a soft synth automatically. Click the Insert Soft Synth button in the mixer to insert one now, and use the DLS soft synth. Set your input device to use the default patch of the soft synth. Zoom into your project so that you can identify each quarter note in every visible measure. It's not really necessary to do this in inline editing mode, but it helps to see what's going on. Arm the track for recording and click the MIDI Step Record button. Notice that the regular Record button is also selected and that the MIDI Step Record dialog opens. In the MIDI Step Record dialog, you make choices about the step size of your notes, meaning how much time will be inserted between notes, the duration of your notes, meaning how long the note plays, and the velocity of the note. We'll just use a very simple passage to illustrate the techniques here. From the step size drop-down list, choose Whole Note. From the duration drop-down, choose Eighth Note. Finally, select the As Played checkbox so that the velocity will be recorded from the controller. Now, position your cursor to the beginning of the project, press any key on your controller, and hold it down. Notice that no matter how long you continue to hold the note down, the note event that gets recorded remains only an eighth note long, since that's what you set the duration setting to. Release the note and play another. The new note event also lasts for only an eighth note count due to the duration setting, and notice that it occurs a full whole note away from the start of the first note event that you created, since you set the step size to whole note. Record 2 more notes so that you end up with an 8th note event on the first beat of the first 4 measures. You can also use step recording in conjunction with the merge recording techniques we talked about in the previous lesson. Place your cursor at beat 2 of measure 1. Change your step size and duration settings if you want to, and click the MIDI Merge Record button. By the way, the tuplet options that you see in the MIDI step recording dialog work just the same as those you learned about back in the MIDI processes and effects quantization lesson. Now, add notes to the musical passage that you're creating. Since you're both in step and merge record modes, you can take advantage of step recording while adding notes without deleting those you previously recorded. As you've seen, you can change the program or patch of the output device to change the sound that your track generates based on the MIDI information on the track. Up to now, you've simply changed the patch to change the resulting sound from the track, but you can do more than that. If you're using an external device as the output device, you can use that device's controls to change the patch you want on the track. To use the device controls, click the Program button and choose Synth Control of Program Changes from the list. Alternately, you may be more comfortable changing the patch by specifying the program, MSB, and LSB values. If so, click the Program button, choose Use Program Change in Bank from the list, and then double-click the specific values to highlight them, then change them. And finally, if you've created or loaded a program map for your device, click the Program button and choose Use Device Program Map. To load the program map for your device, choose Tools, Program Map Editor. Click the Import Program Map Template button, and find the map for your device. If you don't find a map for your device, click the Cancel button. Then click the Create New Program Map button. Give your new map a name and choose a save location for it, then click the Save button. Use the Add New Program or Add New Drum Program buttons to add items to the program list and change the values as appropriate. When you're done, click the OK button. Then click the Program button to choose a program as you have in earlier lessons. You can also set keyframes at various points in your track to instigate program changes on the fly as the project plays. To see how this works, open the project MIDI Program Change from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk. Play the project and notice that it uses the piano sound from the DLS soft synth for the entire project. We'll change the patch halfway through. If you need to, zoom in so that you can see the beginning of measure 4 and place your cursor at that point. Click the Program button and choose Insert Program Change Keyframe from the list. This places an initial keyframe at the beginning of the track. You can think of a keyframe in this context as a marker that defines your project at a particular point in time. This initial keyframe uses the piano patch that was assigned to the track to begin with. Move the cursor to measure 4, click the Program button again, and choose Insert Program Change Keyframe from the list. This places a new keyframe at the cursor location. This keyframe also uses the piano patch, but you can change it. To do so, double-click the new keyframe. This opens the Track Properties dialog to the Output Settings tab and the Program Change setting type. As you saw earlier, you can choose a patch from this list. However, this time you're changing the patch at the selected keyframe only, as opposed to the entire track. Choose Chromatic Percussion from the Program Group dropdown. Select the first vibraphone from the list of patches and close the Track Properties dialog. Play the project. Now the track plays the piano until playback reaches the keyframe, at which time it plays the vibraphone. When you're using an external MIDI controller for recording MIDI information into your timeline, you can set up multiple zones on the controller that will trigger different soft synths. For example, you could create a zone over the lower half of the keyboard on your piano-style controller that plays to the DLS soft synth set to the piano sound, and another zone that plays to Acid Compact set to a different sound. Let's do that now. Open the project MIDI Zones from the Class Number 4 folder on the companion disk. The project contains 2 MIDI tracks and 1 MIDI bus for each the DLS soft synth and Acid Compact. Currently, the output settings for both tracks are set to none. Set the output device for track 1 to the DLS soft synth. Use the default Piano 1 patch. Set the output device for track 2 to Acid Compact. Click the MIDI output button for track 2 and choose MIDI channel 1 from the drop-down list. Now both tracks are routed to MIDI channel 1. Double-click the Acid Compact bus to open the Soft Synth Properties dialog and confirm that instrument 1 is set to Synths, Leads, Bright Lead. Close the Soft Synth Properties dialog. Now let's set things up so that any key on your external controller below the note C5 will play through the DLS, and any key C5 or higher will play through Acid Compact. On track 1, click the MIDI Input button and choose MIDI Input Filters from the pop-up menu. Select Message Filter from the Input Filters Type drop-down list. Select the Enable checkbox. Select the Record Selected Items radio button. Select Note Messages from the MIDI Message Type drop-down list. Select the Note checkbox and then double-click the value in the Max column to select it. Type B4 into the field and press the Enter key. You've just set the highest note which this track will output to the note B4, which is the B just below C5 on the piano keyboard. Leave the Track Properties window open and click the track icon for track 2. Select Message Filter from the Input Filters Type drop-down list. Select the Enable checkbox. Select the Record Selected Items radio button. Select Note Messages from the MIDI Message Type drop-down list. Select the Note checkbox and then double-click the value in the Min column to select it. Type C5 into the field and press the Enter key. Arm both tracks for record. On your external controller, press a key below the note C5. You hear the piano being played through the DLS. Now press a key above the note C5. You now hear the synth being played through Acid Compact. You can use this same technique to create as many keyboard zones as you want. As you can see, Acid Pro 6 features a rich and powerful MIDI feature set. And the new inline approach to working with MIDI information makes it easier than ever to incorporate your software and hardware MIDI instruments into your music creation projects. Now you can truly use Acid for your MIDI sequencing. Before you begin recording, you should do a bit of file organization so that you don't get confused about where the pieces of your project end up. Hopefully, you took the advice I gave in the introduction to this training package, and you've copied all of the files from the companion disk to your local drive. I've copied mine to the My Documents folder on my C drive, so all of the media in my project comes from there. You are about to create a few new files during this class, and it would be wise for you to keep those files stored in the same location as the other files that make up your project. Choose Options, Preferences, and click the Folders tab in the Preferences dialog. Here you can dictate exactly where you want the files to be stored when you create them in various ways. The default project folder setting points to the Sony Acid Pro 6.0 Projects folder. This folder was automatically added to the My Documents folder when you installed the application. Look down the list of separate defaults for each type of project media save. Click the Browse button for any of those, and you'll see that each of them points by default to the same Sony Acid Pro 6.0 Projects folder. If ever you forget to specify a location into which to save a file, look in this folder first. Chances are that's where your file ended up. But in all likelihood, you'll want to keep all of the files for this project together in a specific folder that you've created just for this project. You could go through each of the different project media save types and assign a different default folder. I prefer to use the same folder for each type and change that folder for each individual project on which I work. To do this, select the Use a Single Default Folder for Project Media Saves button. Now, click the associated Browse button and navigate to the Class Number 3 folder inside the folder to which you transferred all of the files from the companion disk. Click the Make New Folder button and name it the name of the project you're recording. The song we're working on is called Can We Take Any More, so that's the name I give this new folder. Make sure the new folder is selected and click OK. Acid Pro will now use that new folder as the default for any type of file you create. Click OK to close the Preferences dialog. It's important to remember that you've just set a system-wide preference. This means that the next project you start in Acid Pro will use the same folder for its saved defaults. Obviously, you want to remember to change the default to a new folder, which bears the name of the new project.